Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Joe Chris, and I'm from the not-for-profit social enterprise Opus Independence that is based here in Sheffield. We've been running the Festival of Debate since 2015 as a platform to bring people together to discuss the key historical, political, economical, and environmental issues of the day. I'm very excited to bring you tonight's event. Tonight's event was an event we originally had hoped to bring you in person back in 2020, but obviously COVID-19 happened. But we're very happy that Gloria has been able to join us online tonight instead. Tonight's event is going to be chaired by Desiree Reynolds, who you can see just next to me here, who's waving, who's an amazing author and writer in her own right from Sheffield. So I'd just like to thank you all for joining tonight. I'm absolutely pleased that Gloria Steinem is here to join us, and I'm now going to hand over to you, Desiree.
Hello, everyone. Hi, welcome to the Festival of Debate. And I can't quite catch my words. I'm actually trying to hold it down really, because I'm so excited to be talking to you, Gloria. And that it's an amazing opportunity for me to talk to you, obviously, and for all of us to be able to just kind of converse with you and listen to all the stuff that you're going to tell us. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to do a little introduction. I mean, if you need an introduction to who Gloria is, I will beat you when I see you later. Gloria Steinem is a writer, lecturer, editor, political activist, feminist organizer. I quite like the words agitator and disruptor. I claim that myself. She's the author of, I tried to count, I think it's 11 books, but someone correct me if I'm wrong.
Actually, I should know, but I'm not too sure myself, because some of them have contributions, and anyway.
Exactly, essays in other things, yeah.
But I aspire to more books, right?
Well, I aspire to forgetting how many I've written. That would work for me, including international bestsellers like Revolution from Within, a book of self-esteem, outrageous acts and everyday rebellions, and most recently, The Truth Will Set You Free, but first, it'll piss you off. I love that book. That was, yeah, really, really love it. And she, alongside Amy Richards, co-produced a series of 8 documentaries on violence against women around the world. There is a biographical film out called The Glorias, which you can still catch on Netflix. You can sometimes can't trust Netflix. You know, you think something's on and then they whipped it off, but it's still at Netflix. I thought it was an amazing film. Thank you so much for joining us, Gloria. How are you?
I think I'm all right. I mean, I'm having a sense memory because I'm looking at a typewriter behind you that looks like my old typewriter.
I'm such a poser. I bought this typewriter thinking I'm just going to go back to how we used to write, and it was so loud. My children complain, so now it's kind of every now and then I feel like I have to kind of get it out and try it, and still.
Well, it shows it's generational, because to go back for me is to go back to handwriting, which I think is visceral and personal and wonderful. But of course I get impatient and then, go back to the computer, right?
Yeah, exactly. I handwrite most things and then edit as I put it on the laptop, which I think maybe most writers probably do. But we could talk about, that's great. I really want to talk about writing and your processes and stuff. But first, I thought I'd ask, and you can definitely answer me this question back to, was there a motivating event or moment that led you down the road to feminism and the feminist movement?
there was a motivating process because it was the era of the anti-Vietnam War movement and the civil rights movement, and great movements about which obviously we care deeply. Yet even within those very important and admirable movements, women still didn't have an equal role, and sometimes quite dramatically not an equal role. So in my experience, it was out of that that we kind of collectively realized that there really needed to be also a women's movement.
Yes. I have a moment which is a little bit more personable, really. I think my moment came when my mom worked 11 years night shift in old people's homes. And my dad worked on what was called London Transport then, but has since changed its name. So he had to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go and work on the tube. And then when he came home, he would insist that my mum wake up and give him dinner. No matter what time she'd gone to bed, he'd come in and say, "Where's my dinner?" And he'd be downstairs looking at the pots in the kitchen, and she'd have to come out of her bed and come and just serve it for him. So I think my moment came, must have been about, I don't know, like 9 or 10, thinking, no.
Oh, that's not fair. Well, I think, whatever the moment is, I agree, it's that classic feeling of it's not fair. And I notice little kids around the world say that. I mean, somehow we seem to be born with some kind of sense of justice. So in India and all different languages, kids say some version of it's not fair, right?
They do. My children say it all the time. Sorry, Gloria, say it again.
No, that's the beginning of movements and revolution, unless it's suppressed, because I do think we have some innate idea of fairness.
And justice. And
yes. Right.
Wanting to change something that it's not just that it's not fair, I might do something about it. Yes. And children might stamp their feet or shout or...
Yeah, it's not fair, it's just the beginning.
Exactly. So your early life was really quite incredible. And there's loads of things I loved about it, but I wondered if you could talk about your life on the road, which seems to have been an integral part of your childhood and your adult life too.
Mm-hmm. Well, my father, who was something of a gypsy, had a small summer resort here in Michigan. And then in the wintertime, he would put us, my mother, my sister, the family dog, all of us into a house trailer. And we would travel to either Florida or California. And of course, we never had enough money when we started out to get anywhere. So we were buying and selling antiques and so on to roadside shops along the way. Therefore, I had an early sense that the road was a possible way of life.
Mm.
Of course, I wasn't going to school, which was something of a problem, right? I was reading all the time anyway. And I suppose in that way, voyaging seemed like a way of life. Since then, I've come to treasure my home here in New York City, my apartment. It's my nest. But I do think I treasure it because I know I can leave, and I treasure traveling because I know I can come home. I mean, even this.
Your dad seems to have been almost like a magical person in the way that he made travel and the existence of wider worlds for you. He made it accessible in a way.
Well, I don't know if magical, but certainly unusual, because he had 2 points of pride. He never wore a hat, which men in his generation were meant to do. And he never had a job, by which he meant he never worked for anyone else. And also, shall I show you his business stationery? It just
Yes, please. Yes, please. That'd be great. Let's see. Thank you.
This was his idea of proper business stationery. Can you see it?
I love that. He's almost like a showman, isn't he?
Well, he was. I mean, he I think felt himself to be in show business, even though he was running just a small summer resort where in those days, entire bands, Count Basie, you know, kind of great bands, but they came through on buses and you know, played on a Saturday night and a Sunday afternoon. That was his version of show business.
So I think that we share a few things in common in terms of childhood. I also looked after my parents at different stages, but as a child, and what we call child carers, I suppose, is what we'd call us today. But I wondered whether, talking about your mum a little bit and her illnesses and how that would have affected your outlook on life.
Well, that's interesting. I wonder what we share, because I do think we have had a similar experience. Yes, from the time I was about 9 or 10, our roles were a bit reversed. I mean, I was looking after my mother because she wasn't well. And although I'm not sure, because our lives are complex, I think that may be why I never felt tempted to have children, because somehow I felt I'd already done that. I'd been a caretaker. Was that true for you?
Yes, it was definitely true for me. I don't quite know how I managed to have 2 children, but I never grew up wanting children.
Okay, I did not, right.
Because like you, I'd felt like I'd done all the looking after I needed to do. I'd also had the experience of coming home and not quite knowing what I'm going to find when I get there, not quite knowing the jobs that I would have to do to pick up the slack. I had a younger sister as well that I had to take care of, and how that kind of shaped my outlook. I think it kind of teaches you empathy.
Mm-hmm. It does. Well, you grow up prematurely because you become responsible earlier than most, probably. But I do think it was true for me, less so for you, obviously, that having taken care of someone, although I kept imagining that especially given my age, I was growing up in the 50s, a very conservative time, that I would have to marry and I would have to have children. But somehow I couldn't quite imagine it. And I guess I just kept not doing it. So after I graduated from college, I escaped to India for 2 years. I just left. I was engaged, but I just left and lived in India instead.
What I was thinking about is like I feel like, you know, the Toni Morrison quote, which was, if you can't see yourself in what you're reading, just go ahead and write it.
Yes, I think that's a wonderful quote. I mean, that applies, given the biases of publishing and everything we know. That's such a beautiful, empowering quote.
And I think that reflects your life, in that you've decided at various points, this thing isn't working how this is. I'm going to do it this way instead. So
it was a little different for me, because as a white person in this country, I could read Louisa May Alcott, for instance, and feel reflected in, I mean, of course, she was writing in the time of the Civil War, but I could feel somewhat reflected in her writing about herself and her sisters. But still, it was a constricted life that I would have been presented with. It just didn't feel right. And somehow I think I understood, perhaps because my mother and both my grandmothers were theosophists. I don't know if that means, but it's a heavily leans toward the East, this gentle philosophy, that this country, which is now about 50-50 white and people of color, but then was majority white, did not represent the world, which was, I think, part of the reason I went to India.
Mm-hmm. But also with how you've approached your writing and the setting up of Ms. Magazine, I just thought perhaps you could speak to not just the magazine, but also your approach to your own career as well.
That was very specific because I was making a slender living as a freelance writer for newspapers and magazines, which I could do, but excuse me, I also realized that I was always the exception. I mean, I remember a Life magazine editor, I think it was Life, anyway, some editor who gave me something, it said, pretend you're a woman and read this, you know. And though there are magazines for women, of course, they were mostly about selling the products they advertised. So they were mostly about cooking and cleaning and fashion and so on. We started Ms. Magazine as the only national magazine that was for women and that was controlled by women. And it's still going, though, in different forms and from California and so on. But that was the motivation, was that women's magazines didn't reflect all of women's lives.
So it kind of, that's what I mean about the Toni Morrison quote, is like, actually, this isn't working in this way, so I'm going to put this together in this way. You didn't have any funding either, did you?
No, well, we had support from New York Magazine. Clay Felker had invented New York Magazine, which was the first of the city magazines. And we had worked together at Esquire. So I was, you know, also part of its beginning. And because of that, he allowed me to put a sample of what would become Ms. Magazine in the year-end issue of New York Magazine. And it was the success of that gave us the courage, in many different steps anyway, to start the first magazine, still the only one, I think, national magazine for women that's controlled by women.
I'm going to quote you now, where you say, writing is the only thing that when I do it, I don't feel like I should be doing anything else. Like I should be doing something else. I wondered if you could...
Is that true for you too?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That whilst it does sometimes feel like, especially as you say, trying to make a meager living being a freelance writer, that's really meager. But I often wonder whether I've made the right choice. Could I be doing something else instead?
We may do other things to augment our living, but somehow I think this is where our identity lies in writing.
I always come back to it. I have strops with it. I'll be annoyed at it. It's a codependent relationship with my writing that I'm annoyed with, and then I'll end up always going back to it.
If your generation's, you know, ahead of me, so I wonder if you can write on a computer. I find I still have to write by hand first. There's something organic about it.
I've tried to write on computer. I sometimes teach and students are writing on their phones. Like I can't even see. I can't see that, but you know, or they'll perform whatever they, you know, like if I say, do you want to read it out? They'll perform it and they'll just perform it off their phones. I'm quite impressed with that because I couldn't see it. But I think the quote resonated with me because I think it was speaking about perhaps imposter syndrome, or perhaps feeling like you should be doing something else, but this is the thing that you're choosing to do, and the writing in the eye, which is what you do very often as well, and that whether that's about reclaiming yourself in a way.
Well, it's, I mean, we each have our own inner personal and public or whatever, anyway, our own voice. And we may feel natural expressing that in different ways, you know, whether it's speaking or photographing or writing. But for me, it's always been writing. I mean, my idea of hell was speaking in public. But of course, gradually, I inadvertently ended by doing that anyway, though I could never do it by myself. I was always doing it with a speaking partner. So I did end up doing it, but I did think I would die. You lose all your saliva. Each tooth gets a little Angora sweater on it. You know.
When I published my first book and I had to read it, I lost 6 pounds. I would vomit before I had to read it. I'd have to need loads of time to go to the toilet before going on stage. I heaved. It was very, very stressful. And here we both are now, just doing it for a living.
It made you feel vulnerable to be saying your own words, right?
Yes, exactly. It felt like it was one of those horrible naked fever dreams that you have, and you wake up kind of checking that you're inside your house and inside your bed, that you haven't stepped out of your house without your clothes on. Or
well, I found the one helpful thing was just I discovered was just to announce in the beginning how scared I was of public speaking, because it is right up there with death as a public fear. So you can get a lot of sympathy by just confessing.
It's true. I have done that, and that whole dryness, like you say. Yes. So we kind of naturally went to that question about speaking, actually, but thinking a little bit now about world events and the fact that the far right is rising, and it has been rising for quite a long time, I think, at least the last 20 years, probably more. Macron winning is great. Obviously, nobody wants Le Pen to be in, but Macron isn't necessarily a great option. I think if it's just two people you have to choose from, I don't think that's any choice at all, if I've got this right. But Macron himself, if you speak to Muslim women, Algerian women, Black women in France, they don't feel like it's like a choice between the right and the far right. And then with Macron winning, there's a fear, which is already happening now, I think, and you can speak to that, where because he's won, there's like a kind of a swift move towards the far right to appease the numbers and to somehow maintain power. Do you think that's what's happening in the US?
Well, we had, and I'm happy to announce, as you know, that we got rid of Trump. And he certainly, I mean, he didn't have a political bone in his body. He's just an opportunist, and a racist, but he did represent the country, which was the low point of my experience. It was kind of an accident in a way of our peculiar state by state electoral votes. But anyway, because he didn't win the popular vote, but he won the electoral vote. He was in power, and we kept apologizing to the rest of the world and said, you know,
well,
change, right? But it was a good lesson, because I think many people had become kind of lackadaisical about voting, that it doesn't matter, or, you know, what difference does it make, and so on. And I hope and believe that his sinister presence has changed that.
Yes. I think it's become a galvanizing moment, isn't it? I like literally or globally with him.
I mean,
now.
in some deep sense, if we don't vote, we don't exist. The decisions about, do we have sidewalks, or do we have childcare, or do we have healthcare, you know, are dependent on our voting, really.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of what's happening in the States, and that the rise in the way that we are now discussing abortion rights is something that I'm not sure you might have thought of when it was passed back in Roe v. Wade was 73, I think. And now, given the new attacks from all these different states about the access to abortion care, abortion rights, did you ever think that it could happen, that it would be reversed or struck down? And also, have you and your team been doing part of the groundswell of opposition? Because we don't hear enough about that over here. We hear enough, we hear a lot about how the bad things are going, but also what are the good things that are happening?
Well, I think two things are true. One is that women, you know, are the only folks with wombs, so there has very often been an effort to control our bodies, and women have always resisted that in many different forms in many different countries, and in my country too. I think that something like 1 in 3 American women had needed an abortion sometime in her life, even when it was illegal. But of course, it meant endangerment and too much money and who knows what, you know, fleeing to another state in order to obtain that. There is a backlash, obviously, as you can see in Texas and elsewhere, not in every state by any means, but to control women's wombs, especially because that's not only crucial in a general sense, but crucial in terms of racial proportions in the country, and you know, so it is fundamental, and it probably will remain some kind of skirmish, even though the vast, something like 2/3 of the country supports the right to safe and legal abortion.
2/3 of the country. So that's something that we wouldn't get over here.
Well, I mean, what gets in the news are the rebellions in Texas, or, you know, but it doesn't mean that the majority of people in Texas agree, or any other state.
Right. And noticing what's happening in Florida as well with DeSantis and what he's trying to do. I think he's particularly scary.
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah. And the Florida, I mean, all the way back to several elections back, I mean, from the first election I remember, Florida has always been a particularly divisive, problematic state, and it continues to be. You know, I think we could go into why historically, in terms of the Native American population, the Black population. So
yes,
but I do think, I mean, I am a hopeaholic, I should warn you. But I do think that we are gradually winning even there. So we are protecting the right to have or not have an abortion. It's important to say that reproductive freedom protects choice, not just one way of life.
Exactly. And I think when I was thinking about what we're going to talk about, I mean, because there's just so many things to talk to you about, but I thought it was quite important to recognize all the good work that's happening over there and over here with younger people doing that work, putting in that time, and holding these politicians to account. That gives me hope, even though I'm generally in between slightly miserable and slightly pissed off. I think that younger people give me hope.
Yes, and there are more representative bodies of government. They look a little bit more like the countries we live in, not completely by any means, but somewhat more than they used to.
They do. I mean, if we go to look at our government in over here, I mean, it's the most diverse parliament I think we've ever had, and still it's horrendous. UK cannot hold itself up as any shining light at the minute, not with the immigration bill where Priti Patel and the parliament want to send immigrants and refugees to Rwanda. No matter where they're from, they want to send them to Rwanda, and they've cut a deal, and it looks like it's passing through the House of Lords.
Oh, I have to read about that. I didn't know that. That's horrendous. Right, right.
It is. And there's other, I mean, I could go on. There are other horrendous things that's happening, but also, like we're saying, good and positive things too. And reading your stuff and thinking about how you've come to organizing, you've actually been doing intersectional work long before Kimberly Crenshaw, the great Kimberly Crenshaw, invented the term intersectionality. And thank goodness she did, because it's proven to be a real galvanizing, unifying the struggle, a real galvanizing way of looking at struggle. But you worked in that way, I think, from the get-go. I wondered if you could speak a little bit more to that.
Well, I think what focus on the present maybe misses is that women of color in my country have always been way, way, way more likely to be activists, to be feminists, to be forming a women's movement inside the civil rights movement, the peace movement, or whatever it is, but being activists, relatively speaking, than white women, and more active in equal pay, fights. For obvious reasons. I mean, they had the double education of race and sex. They were way more likely to be underpaid, and for every reason, they've mostly been in the leadership. So it isn't a question of white women, including women of color. It's more likely to be a question of white women following women of color.
Mm-hmm. I think that's probably the same over here too. I think the difference, though, that was the thing I was thinking, is that how is it different? I think the difference with being someone from the diaspora, any diaspora here, is that those atrocities are committed elsewhere. So being from the Caribbean, there wasn't that legacy of racially charged. I mean, obviously there was pain, there was trauma, but it still mostly took place on somewhere else. So those white people here weren't confronted with that in the same way that perhaps white people in the States were. So when we have conversations about race here, I mean, we just had the government paying for a report that said that racism doesn't exist, structural racism doesn't exist in Britain, and we continuously have the same conversation over and over again. We talk about race, and then we have to redefine race, define it and redefine it before we even get to the point where we can talk about it. And I noticed that you've had an interview with Meghan Markle. Everything about what's happened to her typifies what British racism looks like.
Yes, well, that's of course at a very high, crazy level, the royal family. It makes me so glad we had a revolution and got rid of.
I'm a bit jealous.
Her husband, I mean, are great human beings, both of them, because I had escaped to California during the beginning of the pandemic and was living there for a year. I met them and saw them a few times, and they are both wonderful, kind, activist human beings. And I'm not sure, because I haven't lived in England a long time, but I think their experience was especially exaggerated because of the royal family. I'm not sure that just as average people, it would have been the same.
I think no. The level of it was like nuclear, wasn't it? Like ridiculous. But I think she kind of, and I'm not a royalist either. Absolutely not. And it's not about the people, it's about the institution. So I think that that she kind of typified for what a lot of Black women feel in the workplace, or what they feel like to not be believed when they talk about stuff, or when they use their voices to try and enforce some kind of change. So she kind of typified that. But yes, it was on some crazy level. But then also what I think she's done is that she's displayed racism for the world, really, especially the US, who may not have understood that
within the royal family, and that what she experienced. Yes, I mean, I only saw them a few times, but I just want to say they are both admirable, smart, kind beings.
No, we're all grateful to her, because the fact that she's displayed how life can be here, I think that she's done a remarkable job. So when we're thinking about sort of the feminist movement now, and how it can greatly seem to be fairly polarized in our discussions. Now, we shouldn't think about discussion as being a few lines on Twitter. That's not really a discussion, but it does somehow feel like it's very, very much something that you either have to be one way or another way. And I wonder, when we think about all the issues that affect women, including trans rights, including ableism, can we move forward and disagree at the same time? Because I suppose we have to have a defining sense of principles, don't we? But
I mean, you are part of the Twitterverse in a way that I am not. What disagreements are you thinking of?
I'm thinking about the way we view, like, say, the feminisms between the classes, like how we're seeing trans rights being held up as something to do with that feminism cannot quite contain all of that, when we look on Twitter discourses or social media discourses, and there's a sense of a fragmentation. I think I listened to Bell Hooks saying she's not quite sure where we're at in terms of a movement anymore, but I do think that's also how it's presented as opposed to the reality of it.
Yeah, I haven't, Bell Hooks was a dear friend and a brilliant writer, and so I'm not quite sure what she was speaking of, but I have not experienced that. I mean, the first trans person I remember was a tennis player in the 60s, I think. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And there was a little discomfort because suddenly a person who was like 12 inches taller than most women was playing women's tennis. And so, but but that was not about bias. It was just about, well, maybe we should have sports that are grouped by height and weight.
Yeah.
Maybe sex is not the greatest, fairest way of doing this, which probably is true. Right.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. But I do feel like the conversations are, because it's so, can I get a aha in a few words on Twitter? I think that debate has no nuance, or lacks nuance, because we can't get together and talk.
Do you have an example?
So talking about, say, when I like classism, like the difference between, I said that before actually, the difference between, say, the global majority, where feminism for them has also been linked as perhaps land rights and land preservation and the climate crisis, whereas feminisms elsewhere might be thinking of other things. It's just that us coming together and not necessarily dividing the message, but being more cohesive about it?
You know, whether it's in Friends in Africa or here, it's sort of, it's not exactly land rights, it's equal inheritance.
Yeah.
So it doesn't all go to the son, right?
Yeah.
It's just about equality wherever it turns up, and trying to dispense with labels of gender and race, right?
Exactly. So your latest book, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Published last year by Murdoch, no 2019 actually, by Murdoch Books, is a complete treasure trove of sayings and quotes, and quotes is what you call the poetry of everyday life.
Yes, no, I love quotes. I mean, if you poured water on a good quote, it would become a novel, you know. I mean, they are poetry, plebeian poetry kind of, so they're not usually credited. So I just had a good time putting that book together. Yes, right. And but the writing form I love the most are essays. Because I think an essay can say most of what a book or a novel can say, but in a personal voice and in a space that is somehow more democratic, because not everybody has the ability to sit down and read an entire book.
Yes. And I got that. Again, goes back to writing in the eye, doesn't it? I've only just started doing that. I can do fiction, which I don't mind. I can make up stuff all day.
But I've never written fiction, so I admire your, right. That's great. Right.
But like writing in the eye, as you do, I find that terrifying.
Right.
So I know that I could keep chatting really, but I shouldn't. I know that we have questions coming up, but I'm just gonna ask a couple more, and then I'll turn it over to the audience. You mentioned that a revolution without humor can't really be that effective. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
It turns out that humor or laughter is the only emotion that can't be compelled. You know, you can make someone afraid, obviously. You can even make someone believe they're in love if they're kept captive and dependent for long enough. But you can't force somebody to laugh. And, you know, that says to me, it's a proof of freedom. So if you're in a place, including a church, I have to say, where it's not okay to laugh, then there's a lack of freedom there. Our Native Americans, as we refer to the people who were here before Europeans showed up, many different groups and languages, but their cultures often had a god, sort of, so to speak, or a personification of laughter. And it was the personification was neither male nor female. And also the idea was that laughter, because it was free, broke into the unknown. And if you could not laugh, you could not pray. And I you know, that feels true to me. So I think we need to value and seek and treasure and experience laughter more than probably we do.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. And my last question before we turn over to the audience is that you talk very beautifully. You really kind of touched me talking about aging, and how that you felt like you could be your true self after 50, because you can, going back to that child, right, that's at 10 perhaps, and that when you became 60 changes again. And I wondered whether you could speak to the aging and how women can benefit from what you're saying.
Yeah, I think this is diminishing because gender roles are diminishing in a general way. But I suspect that both the masculine and feminine role, which descend upon us at about 10 or 12 or somewhere in there, and don't go away until 50 or 60. I mean, it's really about getting us to play certain roles and reproduce and so on. So they are inhibiting enough so that, again, I think they're diminishing, but it may be that we are more likely to be our true selves when we are very young or very old.
Yeah. So thank you. I've got so many more questions, but I'm hogging it, and I need to make sure that the audience get their time.
You know the answers. I don't think you need.
Forget about them. Forget about them. So come on then, let's get to some questions. I'm going to go to the Q&A. I'm sorry if I look like I'm staring at you. I'm actually looking at another little box where all the questions are. What are the main issues that you would encourage feminists to focus on going forwards to attain equality? It feels like there is still a long way to go. That's our first question from Anne-Marie. What do you think?
You know, I don't think it's for me to say, because it depends what each woman or group of women, what the experience is. You know, if it's a very unequal pay or unequal promotion or being kept out of certain professions or being made to feel you have to get married or you have to have children. But I mean, whatever it is that is an instruction coming from the outside world that doesn't feel organic and right and freeing to you is then what we each need to function to focus on. And also to find, as I'm sure we can, other people who with the same feeling, because we are communal animals. We need each other's support. And that's how a movement is born.
Exactly, yes. Another question is, what are the main advances for women that you feel proud of in your lifetime? That's a big one.
To me, reproductive freedom is pretty basic, because that's bodily freedom. And you really can't have a democracy if you don't even have decision-making power over your own physical self. This is not to downplay the importance of food equity or of equal pay or of a roof over our heads and, you know, everything else. But in the sense that women's bodies have a unique procreative function and therefore are sometimes controlled because of that function, I think I would probably put that first.
Someone here asked, so I didn't mention Mrs. America because I know that you didn't like it. And I very much more enjoyed the Glorias. But someone has put, fascinated by your critique of Mrs. America, and wondered if you could say more about the way women's histories continue to be appropriated, represented in particular ways. Now, that's a really good question. And thinking about, there's a lot of stuff about far-right women for some reason. I'm not quite sure what the obsession is culturally at the minute about making this stuff.
I think that the basic problem with Mrs. America was a lie about history, because it made it seem that women had defeated the Equal Rights Amendment and that it was women against women, when in fact the vast, huge majority of American women always supported the Equal Rights Amendment. And it was more likely to be the insurance industry that didn't want to equalize their actuarial tables because it would cost them a lot of money, and other forces that were against economic equality that influenced our state legislatures to vote against it. So I fear that Mrs. America made it seem to be a cat fight.
Yeah.
It was.
Yes.
As opposed to, in fact, I think that Phyllis Schlafly was paid by and recruited. She was recruited by right-wing forces. She was interested in foreign policy and military policy. She seemed to think it was kind of a come down to be assigned to women's issues.
Mm-hmm.
So the focus of the show on her, I fear, viewers can tell me, but I fear that it made it seem as if it was women against women, which was very contrary to the facts.
And frustrating, I think. I found it quite frustrating to watch it.
Also, I didn't watch this part because I could see that the showrunners came and showed me scripts in the beginning, and I said, this is a fiction. So I didn't actually watch it all, but I think it also made me seem maybe not like an alcoholic, but at least like I don't know. I think it was personally a little bonkers, but that's not as important as the historical bonkers.
Yes, yeah. Sometimes the fictions that people have of us, it's like, okay, there's not much I can do about that, but maybe I can do something else. Someone says, thank you for all you've done for women. As a Gen X, my life was better thanks to women like you. So what can I do as a Gen X woman for millennial and Gen Z women to help them? What's the next thing we all should do? That's a lovely question.
Well, I don't think that's for me to say. I think in a general way, the best we can do is do the most we can with our unique individual selves. So be an example to other people who are trying to be their unique individual selves. It isn't about being like someone else. On the contrary, it's about being whoever you uniquely are and finding a community that supports you.
Yes. I recently was on a panel for the Guilty Feminist podcast, and they talked about you and that they had a show in New York and that you went back and had a chat with them. And I think that kind of typifies what you're saying about doing what you can do rather than modeling it on something else, doing what you can do and being supportive of others to help them do what they can do.
And one thing that I treasure actually about the later years of feminism is it seems to me that people feel more free to laugh.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Not have to be super serious all the
time. So there's another question. So I'm a second wave feminist from the 70s. And after a number of victories for women, I always had optimism that gender equality would roll on. Foolish optimism. But recent backlashes have made me discouraged. How do you find the enthusiasm to continue the campaigns when we are sidelined and ignored again? It feels like we're going around and around fighting the same rights.
Well, I don't know specifically, what this questioner is experiencing, but the answer is usually in companionship. If you're feeling sidelined, it's probably because you're alone, but there are definitely other people who share your hopes and beliefs, and to try to be in their company If you're working in an unfriendly office, for instance, at least hang out with the other women or have some other group you go to, or, we need that encouragement.
Mhm.
It starts with controlling our own physical selves and safety so that we are not exploited just because we have wombs or just, for whatever reason, sexual reasons, sex trafficking, all of that.
Mhm.
Our physical selves and our right to make decisions, and continues through equal nutrition, equal ability to use our talents, to decide whether or not to have children, to choose who we love, all of it
Mhm.
is part of the revolution.
I think that kind of answers a couple of questions about burnout and about how you manage burnout, which is going back to what you're saying, really, which is about companionship.
And burnout, I mean, maybe you need a rest, I mean.
Aisha, maybe you need to lay down.
Yeah,
maybe you need to
has vacations, so it may be a result of unrealistic expectations of ourselves.
Yes, that's a very good point, which is what we do on a regular basis, I guess, is put these unrealistic expectations on ourselves. What have you read recently that you feel has an important message for us today? I mean, it could have just some joy in it. It may not necessarily have an important message. It could have something that makes you laugh heartily, but also
way too much email and nothing else. But there's Alice Walker has just published a book of her journals, and all of her journals, that I mean, she just, I think, always had a yellow pad by her bed and scribbled on it. So I find that inspiring, because she was revolutionary enough to value her morning notes and thoughts and scribbles.
Yes. Maisha, your questions. Okay, so she's asked 2 questions. Cheeky. I should have said at the beginning, ask 1 question. So your comment about love of being at home and my awareness of ever roaming trumpers made me think about Bell Hooks towards the end of her life. By then, she was defining safe space, not as embracing community, but as her home, only her home, a space she could control and choose who had access. How do you feel about or define safe space in contemporary US society?
Well, I think, like Bell, we each have the power, or should have the power, to define our own safe space. I mean, Belle was not well in the last years of her life. She was living in Berea, Kentucky. She had been a professor. She'd started an institute there, done all kinds of work. She had family members there. But my lasting memory of her, I mean, when I last saw her and before she died, was sitting on her couch in her living room, or reclining on her couch, receiving. She was like a royal figure in a wonderful way, receiving people from the campus, me wandering through, her friends, her relatives. She was definitely the center of energy. I just regret that her presence with us was cut short. She was way younger than me. She should be with us.
Yes.
And of course, we both were born named Gloria, so that was her real name.
There is a brilliant conversation between you and Belle on YouTube. So if anyone, I think there's a series of talks that Belle curated.
She was in New York, and we were at CCNY or someplace. I guess I remember sitting on a stage with her having a good time. I haven't actually listened to this, but I think that's it.
What comes across is that you're both having a really good time. That's what I love about it. You're both joking, you're laughing at each other as well as yourselves, and it really comes across. So I highly recommend that everybody have a look at that.
Yes, I miss her, and I hope that anyone who is watching this who hasn't read her work will be encouraged to do so. It's a delight.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Please do. I'm not sure, so if we can like create some kind of a list of the books that people can have a look at, and whether the Festival of Debate could.
It's online actually, so perhaps people could find it there, or you could put it out. Right?
Yeah. Let's do that. Let's make sure we do that. Joe, who's organizing it, let's make sure we do that. Another question: the feminist movement in the UK is often perceived as middle class, leaving out the voices of working class women. How can this be addressed in your view?
Well, you know, I mean, I haven't lived in London, where I was once a waitress, incidentally. But
Were you? You were a waitress?
yes, in a coffee shop in Mayfair, right. I was on my way to India. It was a long story, but anyway, I haven't lived there in a while, so I don't know, you know, what the reality is. But I think one thing that has always happened with the women's movement, the civil rights, you know, all kinds of movements, is that we congregate in bars and restaurants, in each other's living rooms, in groups of 10 or 12. I think of them as talking circles, because a circle is very important. It's because it's the opposite of a hierarchy. And each person gets to talk while the other listens. And in Native American style, there was a talking stick, which they passed around. So, right. And I think those are, that is kind of the basic cell, you might say, of a movement. So perhaps the person who's speaking now has missed that, and we can create that.
Yes, and I think one of the things that you said before, and the stuff more than once in the stuff that I've read, is that one of the first things that we can do is to listen.
Yes, I do think, you know, democracy, which we think comes from the government or something, actually is more like a tree. It grows from the bottom up, you know. So if we practice democracy in daily life, by that I just mean listening as much as we talk, especially if we're used to talking too much, and you know, talking as much as we listen. I mean, just equalizing those two things makes a huge difference. And creating democracy in the home makes a huge difference. I mean, fathers are parents, just like mothers. So are they taking an equal part in the childcare? More so now, I hope, but I mean, we might just think about that. Or do women have as much life outside the home as men do? Just, you know, equalizing the circles and institutions in which we are every day.
One of the things that you mentioned, which I love, was that we can all commit to kind of everyday acts of rebellion, which might be saying to somebody, you might as well do that yourself. You go ahead, you do that yourself. And I think that's probably true for not just people who are looking after children, people looking after children as well as being whatever relationship is, but I thought as people looking after children as well, that's probably quite a, go ahead and at least try to do that yourself.
Also, it's a gift. I mean,
yeah.
You know, my lesson in this was long ago. There was a well, I had a friend who was running a wonderful childcare center, and there were a neighborhood group of boys. So she invited the boys to come and look after the babies one day a week. And at first they were kind of, they're messy and it's boring and so, but of course babies are interesting, so so ultimately I named the program "Oh Boy Babies" because that's what the boys said every week when it was their day to go look after babies. And that, I'm sure, changed those kids, it made them feel grown up because they were looking after somebody littler. It gave them patience and compassion. Boys need that too.
Well, that kind of neatly segues into another question, which is, how do we engage men more with the feminist movement? I know there are many men who are happy to identify as feminists now, but there also seems to be an alarming rise in a number of young men on social media being radicalized by so-called men's rights activists online who have incredibly regressive views of women.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a sexual fascism. It's really ridiculous that, I mean, our race, our gender, our class, we are each unique individuals. Those men are being bullied into giving up their uniqueness and their full humanity. So I don't know how to approach the problem, because you probably have to know individual men who are, but at least call it out and in a way that says not that they're evil, but what they're missing.
Yes, because I guess we can, toxic masculinity affects them as well as women.
Yes, of course. It's toxic to them, right? I mean, the masculine role kills people. The extreme of the masculine, men die up to 10 years sooner. It depends on which culture, of course, but frequently don't live as long as women because of the masculine role.
Yes, but I read somewhere that there are more boys being born now for the first time, but they, like you say, they don't necessarily live longer, but there are more boys being born than girls.
I don't know. I just don't know what that means, because I'm sorry to say that in some parts of the world there's female infanticide because boys are valued more, and so girl babies may not survive. But I just don't know the facts of the situation you're talking about.
No, I don't know the facts. I think I saw Bell Hooks said, oh, in that interview with you, she's like, oh, they've killed us all off. They've managed to do it finally. They've been trying all this time. It's an interesting question. It's often something that we're asked that we can't really answer in that way, where how do we engage more men? I think it's about men engaging men.
Not up to us. I mean, right. I mean, we've made their soup. We can't make their revolution.
Exactly.
There are a lot of men who realize that they're missing their full humanity. COVID has made a difference, I believe, don't you? Because men have been at home in a way that they would not otherwise have been. And with their children more, seen more what running a house, taking care of children means, have been more equal members of the home community. And it would be really interesting to see what changes grow out of that.
That would be interesting. That's a really good point, actually. I do think it has had an effect. And also had an effect on children.
Yes, because
everyone.
Some kids were getting to see their daddies all day for the first time in their lives.
Yeah, exactly. Or conversely, seeing mom work. I can't do that yourself because I'm doing this. So
I mean, male couples who have children are really interesting advisors on this process, right? Because they men are playing all the roles then.
Yes, exactly. That would be, yeah, they would be really interesting about this. So I'm going to ask for the organizers to let me know, give me a shout, because I could just keep talking when it's time to release Gloria so she can have a break. But do give me a shout or a text or a bell, and I'll just keep asking. I'll just keep talking and asking the questions.
Maybe just one or two more questions, Desiree.
Oh, thank you. Wow, I shouldn't have even asked, should I? I didn't think he was going to be that quick, Joe. So I thought perhaps if you'd like to talk about how you were involved in the Glorias, which is, like I say, available on Netflix, but do catch it because we never know when they're going to take it off.
Mm. You mean the film that Julie?
Yeah, by Julie Taymor.
Yes. No, you know, Julie Taymor, who I think is the filmmaking and theatrical genius of our time.
I loved it.
Read Frida, you know, about Frida Kahlo. I mean, she's just, she really is a genius. She called me and said she wanted to make a film based on my road book. And I said, you can do anything you want, you know, so it's really all hers. You know, I had absolutely nothing to do with it. And I just trust her and admire her. And I think somebody should give her $90 million to make any worldwide movie she wants to make.
It's brilliant. It's very heartfelt. You can tell a woman's directed it. It just feels like it's something that is of our time in a way, how she's made it with 4 Glorias. They needed 4.
She obviously she had never met my father or mother, who had, you know, died long before, and yet she got people to play them that really recreated them. It's amazing.
Did it? That's good. That's really good. Somebody has asked if we can see your dad's calling card again.
They're not. It's his business stationery. It's even
business
worse.
Stationery, yeah.
Here it is.
It's because it's a bit out of focus because of where the yeah.
Can you see it?
No, it's okay. It's because of the.
Here. How can you see it?
No. It's okay. What we'll have to do is have to take a screenshot. But so my last question then is, if you had one message for young feminists today, what would it be? I think I can guess, but what would it be?
Do what you love, you know, do what you love so much you forget what time it is. Because that's probably telling you that you are using your unique talents and interests, and make sure you have companionship, because we are communal animals. We can't be by ourselves.
No. So that's my last question. Thank you very much. I've got loads more. I've got papers and reams of things.
We'll actually meet soon.
I would love that. I would love that. I actually really love New York.
Okay. Good. Okay, we're marking that for the future. And thank you to all the people who participated, who we couldn't see, but were part of our circle. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. And I'll now turn it over to Joe. Thanks very much, Gloria. Much appreciated.
Thank you. It's got dark in my house since we started the event. I've just realised I'm now slightly in darkness. But I just want to say a final thanks to you, Desiree Reynolds, and obviously to Gloria for joining this evening. Thank you very much, and thank you to all at home who have watched tonight. You can check out the rest of the programme at www.festivalofdebate.com. We've got loads more events coming up, both in person and online. It'd be wonderful to see you all there. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy your evening. Good night.